everyone, I'm Matt Ford, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of wall-to-wall news coverage about the presidential election. And since it's election day, and I hope everyone here that is watching voted, let's talk about something way more interesting than Trump or Harris. Let's talk about UAPs, otherwise known, of course, as UFOs. Now, the amount of progress that has been made on this topic is profound. Let's count the ways. We have over 4 years running of congressional legislation on UAPs that is now federal law. Pentagon whistleblowers have testified to Congress about UAPs and the fact that the Pentagon has been hiding that they have a UAP crash retrieval program. And a week from tomorrow, we have the congressional UAP hearing chaired by Congresswoman Nancy Mace. I mean, it's quite a bit of progress. We are standing tall for government transparency on UAP, and we got here by standing on the shoulders of giants who laid the foundation. Today, we have investigative journalist George Knapp, one of the giants who paved the way to where we are on UAP transparency. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on X at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. You can also find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Of course, just search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And if you would like to chip in to keep the lights on, you can become a Patreon member of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. Sign up and you can support our work. We always appreciate that. Our next guest is an award-winning Nevada journalist, author, and weekend host of Coast to Coast. Please welcome George Knapp. George, how are you, sir?
Hey, Matt, how's it going? So we're going to cause some good trouble today, right?
That's exactly what we're going to do. I really appreciate it. And I have to say, I'm excited you're here. And thank you very much for participating in my plot to distract everyone from the presidential election.
Yeah, happy to help with that. You can see I brought a crew of thousands of people in to clean this place up for this prestigious occasion. So let's get going.
That is a lot of research you have back there. That is for sure. Okay, so before we jump into the deep end here, as I adjust my headphones. Before we jump into the UAP part, which of course why most people are here, one of the things I would love to to talk about is a bit of your background. So you've been an investigative reporter in Las Vegas. How did you get your start, and what are some of the non-UAP stories that you have covered?
A lot of what's happened is just luck, Matt. I was living in Berkeley, California. I'd been the debate coach at UC Berkeley. I was tired of being poor and figured maybe I should do something else. And I met these guys from Las Vegas who said, "Hey, you should move to Las Vegas. We know a guy in television there, and he can help you break in." I wanted to go to Hawaii. My partner at the time wanted to move to Las Vegas. We flipped a coin, and Las Vegas came up. I had no idea at the time there was a Nellis Air Force Base or range. I had no idea there was a Nevada nuclear test site, the most nuked place in the world. I had no idea there was a secret little base called Area 51 out there in the Nevada desert, and I had no idea really how I would break into TV. But I walked into this PBS station and offered my services. After I pestered them for a while, they eventually gave me a job as a production assistant, a gopher. I would mix cement and move stuff around, studio cameraman. About 6 months into it, their anchor man retired, and they had an opening. I figured, well, how hard could this be? And I applied for it and got it. And a year later, KLAS TV scooped me up, which was maybe the luckiest part of all, because the news director at the time, this guy, Bob Stoddall, is probably the best journalist I've ever known. He is such a key fundamental to the emergence of journalism and professionalism in Las Vegas than any other journalist, maybe since Mark Twain. And so I worked for KLAS as a general assignment reporter, covering the mob. Everybody did mob stories in those days. It was sort of the beginning of the end for the mafia in Las Vegas. They were entrenched in all the casinos. There was a great deal of corruption stories that I pursued and continued to pursue over the next few decades. I did a lot of animal welfare stories. I did all the crazy kind of events in Las Vegas that you would expect a fledgling reporter to cover, and slowly worked my way up. I was taken under the wing of this guy, Ned Day, who was our managing editor, who was a hard-boiled hard-nosed investigative reporter who taught me the ropes, helped me with a lot of stories, taught me the ethics of the profession. And in those days, KLAS was a behemoth. We had like well, you know what TV is like. We had a 50 share in our newscast at that
Wow.
time, which was unheard of. Eventually, the other stations in town caught up to us. But because I was at KLAS and because over the first 8 or 9 years, I'd learned to be trusted by them, that I had fairly good judgment, they allowed me to pursue UFOs when the opportunity arose in the late 80s.
So yeah, so let's jump right into that. So I always say on the show that my knowledge about the whole UAP thing is like a big block of Swiss cheese with lots of holes in it. And one of the things that I am actually least versed in is the whole Bob Lazar, the whole Bob Lazar thing. So how did you get into, how did that come about? And I understand John Lear played a role in that. Am I correct?
Yeah. So John Lear, although a lot of people know him as quite a colorful personality now, at the time he had a lot of credibility with us. He had worked as a pilot for CIA. His father had developed the Lear jet. John had run for public office. And more importantly, he'd helped KLAS and my bosses, Ned Day and Robert Stoddall, to break a really big story about the existence of a plane that was invisible to radar being tested and developed out there in the Nevada desert. That was a big deal. And because John had given that information to us, he had a certain amount of credibility with Ned and with Bob. He walked into the TV station one day carrying a stack of documents, UFO documents, as I learned later, put them on the desk of Ned Day and said, Ned, this is the biggest story in history. It's the cover up of UFOs. It's going to make you famous. And Ned took the pages and took a look at some of the material, FOIA material, documents squeezed out of the government, pushes the pile back to John and says, look, this can't be true. If it was true, I'd already know about it.
Of course.
And kind of a typical journalist kind of an attitude at the time. I was eavesdropping, which I tend to do. And as John Lear was exiting dejectedly out of the TV station, I said, hey, let me take a look at that pile of stuff. And he plopped it on my desk and I started reading it. And I thought, well, this is pretty interesting. If it's true, that sounds like a good story. And at the time, I produced a little half-hour talk show that would air on the weekends. It was called On the Record. It would be a 30-minute interview with a county commissioner or a city councilman or a gaming official, something like that. It aired at 7 o'clock in the morning, had a very small audience of news junkies. I figured, what the heck, I'll put Lear on this show. I did. And out comes this torrent of UFO information, giant cover-up, secret treaties with aliens, recovered discs, reverse engineering programs. I really didn't know what to think. I sort of didn't believe it. It seemed too much too soon, at least for me. But after Lear had been on that show, my phone starts ringing. People are really interested. I had him on again a year later. And during that interim period, I started reading about UFOs, so I was more up to speed on it. And the response from the audience, again, was much bigger than anything else I had done on that show. So big that I realized that it touched the pulse of the public in a way that I was unaware of before. I hadn't really dug into UFOs at all. The third time Lear comes on the show, he mentions that he's got a friend who had just got to work out at Area 51 and that they've got recovered alien technology stashed in these underground hangars out there in the desert, and that he hoped that at some point this friend might be able to come forward and spill the beans. Fast forward 6 months, it's May, excuse me, May of 1989. Sorry.
No problem.
May of 1989, I was anchoring a 5 o'clock news, and we had a 5-minute nightly segment in that newscast, a live interview with somebody, a showbiz person, an elected official, a gaming official, something like that. Our guest for that day bailed, and we had a 5-minute window to fill. And I just, on a whim, called Lear and said, hey, you mentioned your buddy working on flying saucers. Is there any chance he'd come forward? Lear says, I'll call you back. And in like 10 minutes, he called back and said he would do it. I had no idea who Lazar was. I had no idea really what he was going to say or whether it was credible or whether we could prove he really worked out there. We went up to Lear's house, set a crew. Lazar shows up. He uses a pseudonym, Dennis, which was the first name of his boss out there. We black out his face, and here comes his interview spilling into people's living rooms. Yeah, I worked on flying saucers. They're out in a secret hangar, 9 different hangars out at a base south of Groom Lake, Area 51, and it's been kept secret from the public. And this incredible story. And we're like dumbfounded. I get off the set, Phones are ringing like crazy. The general manager pulls me into the news director's office. Is that stuff for real? Is that true? And I said, I had to admit, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And then Bob Stoddall and I went up and met with Lazar that weekend, put him through hours of questions, where he'd gone to school, where he'd worked, how he got the job. We came out of it thinking, this sounds like it might be true. And can you imagine if it is true? It is the biggest story in history right here in our backyard. Let's find out.
Sure.
Stoddall bemusedly said at the time, hey, maybe we could do a multi-part series and fill it in with other aspects of the history of the UFO topic, maybe 3 parts or 5 parts. We ended up doing 9 parts. I worked 6 or 7 months on it. 9 parts of 12 and 13-minute long stories that we aired in November of '89, and it exploded. It just went worldwide pretty quickly. It put Area 51 on the map. I mean, few people outside of Nevada had ever heard of the place at that point, unless they had worked out there. And it changed everything for me, for my career, for the history of Area 51, and for KLAS.
What an amazing story. Yeah, that just blows me away. I have a newspaper clipping here of, let's see, it's of, what paper here? Because Lazar made like a jet car or something, correct?
Yeah. That's the Roswell Daily Record. The Los Alamos Daily Record.
Okay.
That was sort of the key. I mean, we immediately ran into problems that are now pretty well known about Lazar's background. He had told me which schools he had gone to, and the schools that I contacted said, nope, he wasn't here. And I was about ready to give up on it, and then decided, all right, I'll give it one more shot. We'll focus on Los Alamos. If Lazar really was at Los Alamos working on classified projects in a scientific or technical position, it is at least feasible he could get hired to work out there in Nevada. And went to the lab, Los Alamos lab. They said they had no record of him. I found that article, which mentions, Los Alamos isn't a big city. That's a small town. And on the front page of the paper, there's an article about Lazar saying he's a physicist at the lab. So I went back to Los Alamos and said, what about this article? Nope, he was never here. And I found his name in a phone book from Los Alamos. Didn't say he worked for the lab. It said he worked at the lab. And he had been hired by a company called Kirkmeyer. I contacted Kirkmeyer, which is a headhunter company. I asked if they had records about a guy, Robert Lazar, and they said, yeah. I said, can I get him? They said, sure. If he signs a release, you can have him. And so that started about a 6-month back and forth with Kirkmeyer. At the end of that time, they denied they ever had the records. They denied telling me what they had told me months earlier and just clammed up. And I knew something was wrong. I knew that Lazar had been there. I met people that worked with him at that lab who confirmed he'd been in there, and he took me inside. We took a tour. We went on a Sunday with a camera, drove through the gate. He waves to the guard. They don't even stop us or look for IDs. We roamed through several buildings. He went through it like a rabbit going through his own burrow, obviously knew his way around. People there recognized him and waved at him. Nobody stopped us for a security check. We recorded video and stand-ups, and I put it in the series. So I was convinced that Lazar was there, that I was being jacked around on this topic. And the more I dug into the history of UFOs, I realized the entire world public has been lied to over and over again. What really hooked me on the subject was the paper trail. Matt, I know you've been down this road, but all these documents, memos, reports that were written confidentially, candidly between military agencies, intelligence agencies, where they discuss the UFO phenomena, admit it's real, admit it's not us, that it's more advanced than us, that it's not Russian programs, it's from somewhere else. You know that they, in between, before the FOIA became the law of the land, they were telling each other in confidence, this is real, we need to figure it out. What they told the public, however, and are still telling the public is, there's nothing to it, move along, nothing to see here, folks. So that's what got me hooked.
I'm curious, when you first aired the Lazar story and this thing was like a big hit, did you get any blowback from your colleagues? It's like, hey, George, why are you covering this crazy flying saucer stuff?
Every single day, every day. You know, the radio DJs, they're doing, when they run out of belch, barf, and fart jokes in the morning, they would make fun of me and UFOs. They'd write songs and poems. I was blistered in the paper of record, the Las Vegas Review-Journal. They teed off on me on a regular basis, had editorial cartoons and columnists who would make fun of me. And, you know, it kind of came with the territory. I'm not thin-skinned. I can take it. I have a high profile position. So it comes, I wasn't exactly unexpecting it. But it always bothered me that my fellow journalists seem to be the ones who are most bothered by me covering this. I mean, I'm the same guy who had covered mob stories and won awards and had some acclaim and a good standing with the audience in Las Vegas. I'd done these big stories before. Suddenly I was a crazy man because I was looking at UFOs. Not one of those people who were criticizing it had taken the time to interview the witnesses, to look at the documents. They certainly had not gone out into the desert night after night after night, searching for UFOs or whatever is flying around out there, dodging security patrols, trying to do actual work, boots on the ground work to see if it's real, but they knew enough about it to make fun of it. And that really ticked me off. It still does to some extent.
It ticks me off to this day. I honestly, don't get me started. I'll go off on the whole debunker thing and Wikipedia. We're going to talk about Wikipedia a little bit later. So back to Bob Lazar. I'm curious, are you still in touch with him? Do you ever hear from him?
Sure. I stay in touch with him. We email, and once in a while we'll call or have a Zoom. I don't answer questions about Lazar anymore after 30 some years of answering the same stuff over and over. Every time some new person discovers the Lazar story online somewhere, they start flooding me with questions I've answered many times before. At this point, I don't care whether people believe him or not. I just don't care. You can take a look at it. If you could go into it, well, either you believe it or you think it's a bunch of crap. That's up to you. I presented what we had found out, flaws and all. Some of the holes in the story, those were in the first reports. They weren't some gotcha kind of expose that came later. They were in the first reports we did on the air with Lazar. So, I do stay in touch with Bob. I wish him well. He's tried to leave this behind a few times, but he's had a hard time doing that. Yeah, as you might imagine.
Of course, yeah, that's especially like being the trailblazer in a sense, because no one had really made any sort of claims like this prior to him, correct?
Yeah, I jumped into the deep end of the pool. Crash retrievals, reverse engineering. It seemed pretty far out at the time. Now, not so much. A lot of people are talking about crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs, and there are other whistleblowers and witnesses who've come forward with bits and pieces of information. At the time, it was pretty outrageous. Now it's not sounding quite so outrageous.
It isn't. And I'm curious, I mean, you were for sure likely the first professional investigator to cover this UAP topic, UFO topic. And since then, of course, as you mentioned, we've had all the whistleblowers, we've had the UAP legislation, we have the congressional hearing a week from Wednesday, which we will talk about a little bit later in the show. But I would argue that we would not be where we are today had it not been for you having the courage to take this topic on. Looking back, are you glad you jumped into the deep end and took this on?
Yeah, I mean, I do occasionally wonder what my life would be like if I hadn't gone that way, other things that I could have gone, because once you're labeled with UFOs, it never goes away. I'll be the UFO reporter until the day I die and beyond. I'm not sorry. I was lucky to be at KLAS because I don't think I could have gotten away with what I've done over the years at any other place. The response to that first series was so big, we did another one 6 months later. And from then on, I continued to pursue it, and they continue to support me through multiple general managers, through multiple owners, through multiple news directors. They realize, as I did, that this is of great interest to the public, that you get a response, and that it's real. It's a legitimate news story with many different tentacles, and continue to pursue it. And I don't think that would have happened if I'd worked anywhere else.
I agree. And the way I kind of look at this as well, I mean, we know it's real. I've had this stuff show up above my home many times. And interestingly enough, it didn't start until I began covering this topic. But, what an amazing opportunity, or, it's like towards the end of your life, I think you'll be able to, and I certainly think, I feel I would too, be able to look back and say, you know what, I did something for the betterment of humanity. I brought something out to the world that could have very well still be hidden had it not been for, for the good work that you did. So, my hat is really off to you for having the courage. A lot of people, they don't have the courage to do this kind of thing, especially, it's easy for people like myself to jump into this because of the foundation people like yourself, Jeremy, and others have laid. But that is some serious courage being the first person to do this back in the day.
And luck, too. I mean, I lucked out in some of the relationships that we forged back then. The first person I told about the Area 51 Lazar stuff outside of our newsroom was Harry Reid. I had covered his first two runs for Congress for the House in 82 and 84. 86, he ran for the Senate, and I'd covered that. So we knew each other. He recognized me from badgering him with questions over those years. And the first person I told, because I knew he'd be interested in it, was Reid. And we had a conversation as he was on the airport to fly back to D.C. He says, keep me posted on this. I'm interested. And I did. And we had a subterranean conversation about UFOs for the rest of his life. He helped me immensely. And I helped him as well to understand it. And then the second person who I met that was really key back then, who called me out of the blue, was Robert Bigelow, who has, as we now know, he spent more money on the UFO topic and UFO related investigations than any person in the history of the world. He was just at the start of his interest there, funding UFO research for some really prominent names. And within a few years, he created NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, made up of this incredible team of professionals, astronauts, scientists, academics, former CIA types, and they're on the executive board. I'm invited to speak to the first meeting of the advisory board and talk about Russia. As soon as I came out of that meeting, I'm just blown away by the caliber of people who are there, assembled by Bigelow. And I told Reid about it. I knew he'd be interested, and he sure was. And he got invited to their next meeting. And from then on, he was hooked. That introduction of Reid to Bigelow proved really fruitful years later when Reid secures funding for what became the OSAP program. And for those years, Las Vegas was sort of the unofficial UFO investigation capital of the world. The stuff that was happening here in my backyard with people I knew was some of the most incredible investigations and research into the topic ever. And it was right here. I lucked into it.
I want to go a little bit further into detail about NIDS. I know very little about NIDS. What exactly was it? I know what the acronym means, but what was that whole program about?
Bigelow had made a lot of money in real estate. And one of the reasons he's told me, one of the reasons he wanted to get wealthy was so he could fund research into the two dual topics, the two big mysteries of our lives. Are we alone in the universe? And what happens to us after we die? Is there something that goes on after physical death? So NIDS was created to look into those big questions. It had a number of experts in the two fields. Eventually, sort of the UFO side of NIDS overwhelmed the consciousness aspect. Years later, Bigelow came back and focused on that, which is what he's doing now. But the UFO stuff kind of took over. They did a lot of boots on the ground investigations. When there'd be a UFO hotspot, he'd dispatch these teams on his private plane. They get onto the scene. There would be cattle mutilation cases. He'd send investigators out into the field. They did these national surveys. He did a lot of really great work. They published a lot of that stuff, not everything, but a lot of that stuff on a website that I think you could probably still access, at least some of it. There was really good work. And it became a model for what later would be a government program. NIDS, one of the first things Bigelow did in the NIDS era was buy Skinwalker Ranch. He'd been reading about this UFO hotspot in northeastern Utah. He went to meet with the rancher, learned that the mystery was far more complicated than just UFO sightings, bought the place, put a team on it, set up cameras and equipment, and for 7 years, they had this long observation period where they documented a lot of really strange material. But it was like a cone of silence. They wouldn't talk about it publicly. Because I was friends with Bigelow and knew some of his investigators, Colin Kelleher and others, I would pick up little bits and pieces about what they'd been doing. And I kept bugging them about, hey, let me go to that ranch. I'd like to see it. I'd like to know what's going on. Eventually, as the level of activity at the ranch went down, Bigelow changed his mind and allowed me to go and take a look at it. I think they thought maybe my own inherent weirdness quotient would attract something if I went there and start something going. And And so I did. My plan was to try to make a documentary about the ranch. I started bringing photographers to these trips in 2000, 2001 to 2005, and documenting it. And somewhere along the line, Bigelow changed his mind. He thought a documentary wouldn't be good. We'll be overrun by UFO crazies. Let's sit on it for a while. Instead, got permission from them to write an article in a Las Vegas newspaper, a weekly paper that I wrote for, about the ranch, about some of the activities that had never been made public before, and boom, these articles went all over the world. Suddenly, Bigelow's prediction about how people would react to the ranch proved true. All kinds of UFO crazies were coming on the property, but the Skinwalker Ranch was put on the map in essence. And after that, Colin Kelleher and I were allowed to write a book about it, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, it was funny. I was when Skinwalkers Skinwalkers at the Pentagon came out. I was actually at Disney World for a site survey for a television show, and I downloaded the ebook on the flight, and had our meeting, and I literally read the book until I had to be at work for the meeting the following day. I stayed up the entire night. I was so riveted with that thing. So I'm curious, what was during your various trips to Skinwalker Ranch, what would you say was sort of the most bizarre experience that you had there yourself?
I never saw anything weird, and I think after 7 or 8 trips there, we're sitting around under a tree with the caretakers of the property and Bigelow and me and a next door neighbor. And I just blurted something out that sounded weird. I said, of all these stories I've heard about weirdness and strange stuff and spooky, scary activity and things that go bump in the night, I have to admit that I feel really good when I come here. I'd never seen anything really truly strange, but I felt like I had my finger in an electric socket or something when I would get on that property. And a couple of the people who were there said, yeah, we feel the same way about it. So not everyone has bad experiences, but, I interviewed so many people, people who'd worked on the ranch and spent a lot of time there, the NIDS people, neighboring ranchers, people in the community. And it became pretty clear that there'd been a wide range of really weird stuff for a very long time. UFOs had been studied since the 70s. That had been a real hotspot, at least since then, and probably longer. The investigators who were collecting UFO stories back then were not looking into paranormal, crazy creature, weird stuff that sounded too outrageous at the time. But the NIDS guys were willing to follow the evidence where it led and got all these stories about, these are credentialed PhD folks who told me about these things that had happened to them on the property. Strange creatures they had seen, that what looked like a portal of light right in the middle of the homestead that they're seeing. There's 2 guys up on top of the ridge, 2 guys on the bottom, walking through the pasture, dark of night. All they see is a dirty snowball of light, but this thing starts stretching into a tunnel of light, and a creature crawled out. It's wriggling through this tunnel of light, stands up like 8 feet tall, humanoid shape, black features, can't see a face. As soon as it gets out, this tunnel collapses back into a little ball of light, and the creature starts running up the hill toward the guys who are on top of the ridge. They got the hell out of there. That story is witnessed by some really credible people, really stuck with me. And then Colin Kelleher and Eric Davis are there. There had been some terrible mutilation incidents of these cattle right next to the ranch. Really bizarre instances. The rancher had lost something like 14 head, very expensive animals, and he was ready to give up. They're there when this calf gets mutilated in broad daylight on a Sunday morning as the rancher and his wife are out on the pasture where it happened. It's as if that calf had been taken somewhere else, carved up, and then brought back and dumped there. Every bit of blood out of the animal, no blood on the ground, no teeth marks. It was not a predator. Something had used 2 cutting instruments, something like a big machete, and as well as a scalpel-like instrument for finer cuts, and then just left it there, seemingly to generate a reaction. Well, it worked because everyone was on edge. So right after that thing had happened, these guys from NIDS are on the property. There's a noise at night. Something is bothering the animals, the cattle. The rancher grabs his gun. I'm not losing another one. And he goes barreling out there in his truck. Colin and Eric follow at night. They're flashing a spotlight, and they got a camera rolling, video. The rancher jumps out of his truck. He sees something at the bottom of a tree, a large black thing, like bigger and rounder than a bear, and takes a shot at it, and it goes poof and goes away. And then there was something up in the tree with these giant yellowish eyes, like cat eyes, or maybe a dinosaur. He shoots at that. Whatever this thing was, it falls out of the tree. There's a little pile of snow at the bottom. There was still snow on the ground at the time, and it left a track, a three-pronged track, like a raptor of some sort in the snow. They get up there to where this thing had fallen out. They don't see any blood. They see the track, and the rancher goes into the bushes looking for this thing, whatever it was, which is crazy to think about. That's a heck of a story. And I know in subsequent years after we made that public and about some of the other creatures that have been seen, how preposterous it sounds. I give a lot of credit to these guys, though. They have PhDs. They don't want to be seeing dinosaurs in a tree. They don't want to see werewolves and hear those stories from the neighbors. They don't want to see creatures that don't exist, the dino beavers and things that people have made fun of. But there they were. Credible people seeing this stuff, seeing tracks, physical marks that were left behind, evidence of different kinds. And so they report it. It was never meant to be made public, I don't think. The same was true for the OSAP study that comes later, where a lot of really strange things were seen. I never saw any of that stuff. I think the weirdest part probably is the hitchhiker phenomena.
No, please. That was going to be my next question. Did you experience a hitchhiker phenomenon at all?
Yeah, I did. I guess it's my fault. What would happen is people would go there. It seemed like the people who had the worst time were those who were really the cockiest and most boastful. People who packed guns, who would sort of mentally prepare themselves, saying, I'm not afraid of anything out here. I'm going to come and kick its ass, kind of an attitude. They're the ones that got it the worst. And there were investigators during the OSAP study, which was, completely quiet. The public wasn't hearing about it. Intelligence officials, badasses, tough guys who'd served in the military or special forces operations, who were assigned to go there to check out the ranch, and all of them took something home. And it was kind of harsh on them. There's a guy whose story will be out eventually. I've told part of it under a pseudonym in that Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. The guy we identify as Axelrod, he had this, brought it home, and his family started seeing creatures in their yard. There were a lot of poltergeist type things going on, things moving around on their own. Their dog ends up on the roof of the house, of a 3-story house. The kids are seeing balls of light and humanoid shapes inside their rooms at night. The neighbor kids start seeing stuff. And they had what amounts to like a werewolf, a wolf man out in their front yard. This guy and his family were tortured with this for years. They're still experiencing it in 2 different homes more than a decade after he was on the property.
Wow.
And the other people had their own experiences that we detailed in that book. We had written about Skinwalker Ranch, Colum and I, in that first book. Strangely, luckily, 2 of the people who read that book were Dr. James Lakatsky and Jay Stratton, who at the time were working for the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. They're the ones who read the book, thought, this is kind of interesting. We should check out these portals and UFO reports. This is pretty bizarre. Lakatsky goes to the property, has an experience of his own. The first time he visited it, the only time he visited it, goes back to DC, pitches a proposed program to his bosses at DIA, then takes it to Harry Reid, who secured $22 million in black budget funding for it, and OSAP was born. Bigelow Aerospace gets the contract. He announced a week after he signed the contract, he went on Coast to Coast with me and said, hey, we're launching a new UFO-related investigation. I've got a secret partner that's in on it. He didn't say who the DIA was, but that was the beginning of OSAP. And what they did, just an incredible amount of work. They had the courage to follow the evidence where it leads. And no matter how bizarre things were, that's what they did. But so many of the people who worked on that program carried things home with them, including me. I wasn't part of the program, but I was allowed to be a fly on the wall for a lot of it. And like other people who had been to the property, you bring something home. I didn't see it, but my wife did. First, she noticed these blue orbs hovering over our house, called me up. I was downstairs, and by the time I got up there, they were gone. And later, she had something come into our bedroom. And it was physical. And the same exact thing happened to Colin Kelleher's wife. The same exact thing happened to Robert Bigelow's wife and happened to other people who had been part of that investigation.
And I'm curious, did that continue to occur, or was that sort of a one-off experience?
It was a two-off for us. It went away. It hasn't happened since, or at least we haven't noticed it. For Bigelow, I think it continued a little bit more. I can't speak about Colin, but you'd have to ask him if it's continued for him. But I know for the one investigator, it continued for more than a decade.
That is just yeah, wow. I wouldn't want to be that person. I want to back up a little bit and talk about Bigelow, and then I want to jump into OSAP. Why did Bigelow get out of, or seemingly get out of this whole business?
Well, NIDS, the Skinwalker became a central part of what NIDS was doing. And when the activity went underground, it was as if whatever that intelligence is that operates there, that lives there, it didn't want to be hunted anymore. And so the level of activity at the ranch wasn't really enough to justify having a team there and spending all that money all that time. There were some business considerations for Bigelow. He was trying to create what became Bigelow Aerospace, putting all of his money in funds and resources and attention into that pursuit. And the ranch became sort of a distraction. So he sort of put that on ice. That's why I was allowed to go ahead and visit and start investigating and writing about it. But he had a lot of other things going on in his life. Eventually, I think 2016 is when he sold the property after the OSAP program had been removed. And, eventually Bigelow wanted to refocus his energy and attentions after Bigelow Aerospace shut down and return to his first initial pursuit, is what happens to us after we die. Is there evidence of consciousness surviving physical death? That's what he's doing now. So he's a guy whose priorities change from time to time. He's got a lot on his plate.
Now let's jump into OSAP. So what is, for the viewers at home that have never heard of it, what does OSAP stand for? And so what was it in a nutshell?
Okay. Well, again, Jim Lukatsky and Jay Stratton, or as the DIA, they read Hunt for the Skinwalker, passed it around to other colleagues, seeing what they thought, and they thought, hey, this might be something that we should investigate. And the DIA hierarchy agreed. It was a stovepiped program. People in the desk next to where Lukatsky was, they didn't know about it. Very few people in DIA knew about it. And it was basically an investigation into the broader aspects of the UFO mystery, including what had never been really studied by a UFO program before, funded by the government, injuries to people who come into proximity of UFOs. That was one of the main focuses. So the DIA had outlined how it would begin. They had 38 papers that they produced, which were meant to be a baseline of what we know about current technology now and projected 40 or so years into the future. So there was a paper about warp drive, what we know now and what we might know in the future. Could we develop warp drive? Never mentions UFOs, doesn't mention UFOs at all. In fact, a lot of the scientists who were hired to write these papers didn't know it was a DIA UFO program at all. They just expanded. For example, there was a paper by a UNLV engineering professor here in Las Vegas about hypersonics. Now, at the time that paper was written, 2009, there was no operational hypersonic technology.
Right.
But seeing into the future, how do we track hypersonics when somebody is able to make them? It was really the designers of the study wanted to talk about how we could track UFOs in the future, but they made it hypersonics about human technology so that there was a baseline and we could tell the difference when we see something in the sky. Is that us or is that them? And but that paper written in 2009 became so much more relevant years later when the Russians and us and Chinese all started developing hypersonic technology and missiles of our own. So it was a kind of a broad-based explanation of where we are technologically, metamaterials, things of that sort, and a projection in the future. That's the first step. The second step was a very broad-based investigation. OSAP, within 6 or 7 months, or at least within the first year, they had hired 50 full-time investigators to go to UFO hotspots, to investigate cattle mutilations, to investigate medical effects on people who come into contact with UFOs and get injured, and all aspects of the UFO mystery, even some that are so outrageous and deemed to be pseudoscience, such as these strange creatures. It was a courageous program based right here in Las Vegas. They created the world's largest UFO database, I should say, data warehouse. Jacques Vallée designed that. There were 260,000 UFO cases involved in that. And if they had been allowed to continue beyond 27 months, they had an AI intelligence, artificial intelligence component that would have been able to make a much greater use of that UFO database that they had built. They went to foreign countries and got UFO files from those countries. For example, Brazil. The Brazilian government did some pretty intense UFO investigations of a place called Colares and a series of really strange incidents. Those files had been kept out of the public for the 20 years or so. OSAP went down there. The BAS team went down there, got the files, brought them back, put them in the database. They got MUFON's files. They had a financial relationship with MUFON for a while, the STAR team, to finance investigations. Hey, you guys sort of filter out which programs, which incidents are real, and then we'll take it from there. So MUFON got money to do investigations, and the NIDS guys, the OSAP guys would come in and continue the investigations. All that stuff went into a series of reports. They produced more than 100 of these highly detailed documents. For example, there's a 143-page report on the Tic Tac. The very first case that OSAP investigated was the Tic Tac. There was an 18-page report about the Tic Tac compiled by a guy whose name will be well known soon. It was the very first investigation, 5 years after the incident, the very first case that they looked at. And the reason that the world knows about Tic Tac is because of the work that was done back there by OSAP. I made that report public in 2018. But other than that, and some documents about the contracts, 100 reports, thousands of pages altogether, highly detailed engineering and physics analysis of UFO cases, an examination of UFO injuries. None of that stuff, not one page of it, has been made public in all the years since we've known about OSAP.
And do you know why that hasn't been made, or they haven't been made public?
I can't really explain. It's kind of complicated. I think both Bigelow and DIA would have to agree to release that stuff. A lot of people have filed FOIA requests for those papers. None of it has been acknowledged. I think DIA has said we can't find this stuff. We don't know where it is. That's the official excuse. But I can tell you, I've seen it. It's real, and it's amazing stuff. And there's nothing in there that's classified. There is nothing in there that the public shouldn't be allowed to see.
Well, I would think that Bigelow certainly has a copy of it. Do you still keep in touch with him? Does that ever, sure. And if so, does that come up in conversation?
Yeah, he's not going to release it.
Okay.
I think he has high hopes that eventually he'd like to return to it, and at least wants to keep the option open. He figures that, I think if he released all that material, especially without DIA saying it's okay, he'd never get a chance to do this again. All those people, those 50 investigators, had to have security clearances. They had to be cleared by the U.S. government and go through background checks, and they had to agree to keep their mouths shut. And the ones with clearances are not allowed to talk about the stuff that they saw in that program.
Of course.
Colm Kelleher has gone about as far as he can, as has Jim Lakatsky. That book that we co-wrote, actually two of them, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and then Initial Revelations Inside the U.S. Government Covert UFO Program, they had to be cleared through the DOPSR process. The first book, it took 14 months to get it cleared, and they cut a lot of stuff out. And the second one, the same thing. The second book, the UFO world is always bitching and moaning. Show us the data. Where's the data? Well, this is a book that's filled with data. Measurements of UFOs, physical characteristics of UFOs, and engineering capabilities, analysis. We filled it with data from real UFO cases, and really nobody paid much attention to it at all. So the demand for data rings a little hollow, at least with me.
Yeah, that would be a great thing for Congress to, go to Mr. Bigelow and say, hey, what can we do to get a hold of these files? It sounds like they would answer a lot of questions to lawmakers.
You're absolutely correct. You'll recall last year in July 2023, that summer hearing that they had, I was there. I submitted a statement and I said exactly that to Congress. Hey, there's a gigantic treasure trove of UFO related information, reports that the public funded. We paid for it. You haven't seen it. You should go after it. They still haven't got it.
Yeah, that's a shame. I want to go back to Dr. James Lakatsky. And as you mentioned, he's the former head of OSAP, and he claims, of course, that he has direct knowledge of an unknown craft, no wings or tail or rotor or engine. Is that something that you can elaborate on?
I can repeat it, but Jim he plays by the book, by the rules. He only releases and discusses things that he are cleared to release and talk about. Somehow he got that through the Doppler process and was allowed to write about it, saying basically he has personal knowledge of this. You call it a craft. I've tried to answer because he's my co-author on 2 books. I figured he'd open up to me. He doesn't. He doesn't describe where it is. I've asked him, well, look, this thing doesn't have an engine, doesn't have wings or rotors. We don't really even know how it flies or whether it flies. How do we know it's not like just an alien doorstop or something, which he laughs about but won't answer? So until he gets clearance to go ahead and say more about it, I think that's about all we can get out of him. And look, I'm his friend. I've known him a long time. He shared a lot of information with me, but won't talk more about that. But I think given his stature as a career intelligence guy, an analyst who had among the highest security clearances in the country, he knows this is true. He knows we've got it, that it's real, that we didn't make it. It's from somewhere else, somebody else's technology. But as yet, he's not cleared to say more about it. I think just acknowledging that much of it is pretty important, though.
Going back to this whole OSAP thing, did they have recorded, was there any video evidence, any multi-sensor evidence that they collected that would corroborate this whole thing that there are, vehicles of non-human intelligence flying around?
Yeah, they did. The very first Tic Tac investigation, a lot of people are trying to say that was seagulls or it's flare from a jet, that, the pilots were fooled, that anybody can be wrong. It's preposterous. These are the best aviators in the world, flying the most advanced warplanes in the world as part of this gigantic flotilla, this armada of sophisticated sensors and other sensor platforms in the air that detected these things, not just one, but multiple, dozens of them over a 2-week period. And then the one that was captured in a video image that we've all seen. There's a lot of sensor information that went into that very first program, that very first report that I made public in 2018. And there was more. I would like to emphasize, though, the OSAP program was not focusing on military classified cases. That was all handled by somebody else. This was a broader scope, looking at civilian files, civilian cases. They did have to get security clearances, all the people who worked on the program, but they weren't exchanging files with the Pentagon. The Pentagon didn't even know what they were doing. And when the Pentagon and the DOD found out about OSAP, that's when the knives came out and the program was killed.
So I guess really kind of what I was asking there was a considerable amount of footage and information other than the Tic Tac. We've all heard about the Tic Tac, but there's a considerable amount more data that they are in possession of.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So speaking of the Tic Tac, I want to talk a bit about Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who of course was the former director of AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. This guy he keeps on yapping. It's like he from what I understand, when he kind of went rogue on LinkedIn, and he really angered Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks. And I'm guessing she read him the riot act, but apparently he said, okay, I'm out of here at the end of the year. If I left a job in the Pentagon and I worked, got a cushy job in the Department of Energy, I sure wouldn't be out there yapping about, something that I was previously involved in. It just seems weird. And Kirkpatrick claims that this whole Tic Tac thing is explainable. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he was hired to do the job that he did, which is to crap on the topic altogether. I think that's, there's not a clearer indication of the DOD's long-term intent when it comes to UAP, UFO matters than what AARO has shown us, that there's nothing to it. It can all be explained away. UAP Task Force, which existed before AARO, before AIMSOG, was doing good work. And they whittled down, you'll recall the report that came out and was given to Congress, 144 of the best cases, 143 of which could not be explained. Well, somehow AARO in the course of just a year, was able to explain them all. Basically, they can all be explained. That preposterous report that they put out, filled with factual errors and glitches and mistakes that tried to wash it all away, doing exactly what DOD has done to this subject for decades, lying to us about it. Trying to explain away the Tic Tac. They can't quite understand how to do it. So Kirkpatrick says, originally, he says what? Oh, if only we had more data, we could explain this thing. And then he comes out and says, well, we've got the data and it is explained away, but it doesn't quite explain how it is. And now I think the most recent comments are the most ridiculous of all, talking about secret projects, preposterous, being tested out there right in the middle of the Nimitz carrier group that's doing maneuvers, or it's a balloon. It is such an insult to people like Dave Fravor, commander of the Black Aces, among the best pilots in the world, certainly in our military, who know their machines inside and out, who have top secret security clearances and are trusted to protect our national security, telling them that they're wrong and they can't tell a balloon or jet exhaust or a seagull from the objects that they not only chased for more than 5 minutes, saw with their own eyes, recorded on instruments and captured on video, that they're wrong, and that people on X, or people like Sean Kirkpatrick, who has very little appreciation for actual data, that they're right and there's nothing to see here, move along. It's insulting. It's ridiculous. They didn't explain Tic Tac. And you notice they haven't released any data that they supposedly have to verify this conclusion by Kirkpatrick. And like you, I am mystified why this guy keeps yakking. He apparently did not like that job. He thought it was going to be a cushy little assignment that everybody had thank him for making this issue and this mystery go away, and found out it wasn't so much fun. I'm amazed by how thin-skinned the guy is, that he reacts late at night on some personal social media site and lashes out at people who dare to criticize him. I don't think he's used to that, and it makes me kind of laugh a little bit. But I'm curious, like you, Matt. I'm curious how the new guy will do. I've heard good things about him, but of course I heard good things about his predecessor too, the interim director, and so far we haven't seen it.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody that had a very extensive conversation with his predecessor, and what came back was not good feedback. And I would say that it would pretty much support what you were saying earlier, that Arrow was meant to kind of, really kind of derail this whole thing. I'm hopeful that the new guy will turn things around, but at the end of the day, they're not going to go against what people up the chain of command are telling them what to do. If they're like, hey, we want you to do X, this guy, he cares about his retirement and all of that kind of stuff. He's gonna take the marching orders.
I mean, just think about that. Arrow, this tiny little office inside the gigantic, sprawling Department of Defense, is tasked with investigating its parent organization that is going to expose lies and cover-ups and millions of dollars that have been funneled into illegal programs. Really? We expect that to happen? It's not going to happen.
No.
I think they've made it very clear what the long-term picture is going to be. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the new guy changes the direction. But it seems to me that there were very clear goals from these reports that have come out of Arrow. Get Congress off its back, discourage people in Congress from asking too many questions, give them ammo that would suggest this is all a waste of time, and also to get mainstream media to go ahead and go back into their cover-up and into ignoring the topic, which is what they've done for decades. And to some extent, I think that's probably happened. You're not going to see another UFO story in the New York Times, doubtful at the Washington Post. I'm hopeful that 60 Minutes will go ahead and pursue it. But all that big flurry of media coverage that we got, that evaporated. And I think Arrow gives them permission, in a sense, to go ahead and go back to ignoring it, which they've done for so long.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, I've been sort of mulling around this theory in my head that, so after this hearing, after the House hearing coming up, Senator Gillibrand is having a Senate hearing. And I have this sneaking hunch that we may see some kind of admission that, hey, maybe there's something strange going on here, but we need to collect more data. Like, give give the Congress just enough to make them feel like Aero is doing their job. But the real intent, and this again just hypothesis in my head, the real intent is to distract from the talk of crash retrieval programs. Like that is like the third rail. So if they can just put out just a small amount of information to make them think, oh, Aero is doing something good. Let's give them more money. Let's give them more time. And then people kind of forget about the whole CR thing. I could be wrong, but it's just a theory. But I the whole Kirkpatrick thing, it's just embarrassing. I think, and also too, like you look at that historical UAP report. I don't have kids, but if I had a fifth grader or a fourth grader, they would have done a hell of a lot better job than what Sean Kirkpatrick was able to produce. And are you hearing anything about this supposed second report coming out? And then also, second part, did you ever hear or ever speak to someone that saw the classified version of the first report, and was it any better than the public one?
The impression I got to the second question is that there's not that much more in the classified report. I agree with your assessment that they will likely try to stretch this out. Hope I'm wrong. Hope the new guy comes forward and shares some information of substance, but I'm not going to hold my breath for it. I don't think they're going to ever admit that we've got crash saucers, or that there's a reverse engineering program, or that there are bodies. I don't think the DoD will ever admit that on its own unless it's forced to do that by whistleblowers or leaks. Or I can tell you there is a great deal of data. There is a great deal of images that have been captured on various platforms, some of which are classified that I'm not allowed to know about, but I know they've got it. I know for sure they've got it. And I know for sure that they haven't shown it to Congress, or at least a lot of it, that there is actual physical data, a lot of information that they're pretending doesn't exist. They've got it. It's not encouraging in the long run, I think, to see how they've treated the topic so far. Hope the new guy changes that assessment. I'm not sure if Senator Gillibrand is going to ask really tough questions. I think probably like a lot of people, her enthusiasm for the topic seemed to wane in terms of her willingness to pin them, call them on the carpet and pin them down. I hope that changes after this election. Maybe she'll have more freedom, assuming she gets reelected, to go ahead and pursue this. The whole country has been sort of paralyzed with this election season and the nastiness. And a lot of those folks in the House, they're all running for reelection. So I know that they've got to be focusing on trying to get back there if they want to continue their inquiries. It's only human that they would be focusing on that more than UAPs. But, after today, presumably it'll be over for most of them. They're either reelected or they're not.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I'm ready for all this to be over with. I think everybody is just about ready to lose their mind. Yeah, don't get me started.
I'm looking at my phone and my email today thinking there can't possibly be still asking me for money today on election day. I'm flooded. How could they possibly be asking for donations today?
Oh, yeah.
What are they going to do with it?
Yeah, Kamala keeps texting me. I wish she'd leave me alone. Now, we spoke a bit about like the whole crash retrieval thing. Now, last year we had whistleblower David Grusch come and essentially say, we have had this very long-running program, unacknowledged wave special access program dealing with crashed UAPs. And I want to touch on what you briefly spoke about earlier with the Soviet Union, because I think what happened with you during Glasnost, I can't pronounce it, Glasnost, whatever. I think that's a really interesting story about how you went out there, what you discovered, because I think in many ways it buttresses David Grusch's claims that we have been in this very long, unacknowledged Cold War between China and Russia and perhaps other countries to reverse engineer captured craft. Walk us through your Russia story. I absolutely love this story.
Right around 92, I think, I saw this article in the New York Times. It was about the KGB's files on Lee Harvey Oswald. Maybe it was 91. Lee Harvey Oswald. KGB had released these files that said Oswald didn't work for us. take that off your plate. And I thought to myself at the time, hey, if the KGB is releasing stuff, I wonder if they have UFO files. You would assume they're the other superpower in the world, that they had done the same kind of secret investigations that the US had done. And if we could somehow get over there and get them to open up, we might learn more about what the US government knows about UFOs from the Russians than we're ever going to learn from our own government. That was the premise. And in the door walked an opportunity. There was a congressman named Jim Bilbray, congressman from Nevada, was a friend of mine. He had been, I'd talked to him many times about the UFO mystery. He'd been out to Area 51, poking around and asking questions. And he came to me and he said, hey, I've got a Russian physicist who's here in the US. He's been giving disarmament lectures at national labs. And he's about to come to Las Vegas on his way back to Moscow. You want to meet him? He might know something about UFOs. I said, yeah, sure. Let's do that. We went out and had a couple of beers. His name was Dr. Nikolai Kapranov. He had been the national security advisor to the Russian parliament, was also Boris Yeltsin's national security advisor. He had helped train Russian cosmonauts to locate American nuclear submarines from space. He was dialed in. So I asked him, hey, you ever heard any of your friends in government talk about UFOs? And he said, no, that doesn't ring a bell. We have sit there and yammering and talking about Russia a little bit. He goes, yeah, I do. I had a friend who worked for KGB who did say that there had been an investigation. They had some files. And I said, well, hey, let's arrange something. You think we could get them to talk to us? Over the course of the next couple of months, we sent him back to Moscow, gave him a stipend to support him while he was back there because he didn't know quite what he was going to do, and tasked him with finding people who'd been inside the Russian military or government in positions to know. But the caveat was, I don't want anybody who's ever talked about UFOs in public, not to Russian media or American media or anybody, just people who know about it but haven't talked about it. And that's what he did. And took about 8 months, and he located a bunch of people who were right in the thick of it, who had worked on these programs, investigations, and they agreed to meet with us. And I went over there in 1993, spent 10 days in Moscow. One of the first people I met was a colonel named Boris Sokolov, who'd been the head of what was then the largest UFO investigation in the history of the world. It had been a 10-year-long program from 1978 to 88. An order had gone out to the entire vast Soviet military empire. When you have a UFO case, a ball of light, an unknown craft, something weird in the sky, you got to investigate it. And all that investigation and interviewing with witnesses, all the physical evidence, whatever you got, goes to one central location, which was the Ministry of Defense, where Colonel Sokolov's desk looked at all of it. They had thousands and thousands of reports. They had some very dramatic encounters, Russian warplanes chasing UFOs. 3 of them crashed. 2 of the pilots died. There were photos of Russian planes that had collided with UFOs. There was an incredible instance at an ICBM base in the Ukraine. Nuclear missiles aimed at the United States or a UFO. It's very reminiscent of the 1970s cases along the US-Canadian border where American nuclear missile bases were disabled, were attacked by UFOs in essence. UFOs went over this base in the Ukraine. They were there for a couple of hours. A gigantic UFO that split into smaller ones performed amazing maneuvers, according to the eyewitnesses. And then after a couple of hours of doing this stuff in front of all these military guys, the launch control codes for these Russian ICBMs was entered into the system. These things fired up. The Russians who are at this machinery are trying to stop it frantically. We're about to launch World War III, and it's not responding. The UFOs, somehow the launch control codes enabled these missiles, and then poof, UFOs went away, the system shut down, all went back to normal. Colonel Sokolov sends a team to this base, took apart this machinery, the launch systems, looking for some kind of a problem, couldn't find any. It had never happened before. His office concluded that the UFO people, wherever they're from, was sending a message that they could control this most fearsome technology and are not all that impressed by it. That was a really dramatic incident. It was real. I have copies of the original witness reports, all of them officers. Those were in other documents that were made available to us. A lot of this stuff was classified at the time, and I brought it back. I had to go to use a little subterfuge to get it out and not get arrested, but I brought it back. And eventually I shared some of that with the U.S. government. There was an investigator for Congress, for the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, who was specifically asked. The Russians wanted me to reach out to someone in that position and share some information about their remote viewing program and about their UFO investigations before it all went away. And I did that. And eventually I gave the files to OSAP, to the DIA program, which kind of bought me a ticket in. I had limited exposure to what they were doing at the time, but I did get to see some of what they were doing. I was asked a couple of times to get a security clearance and become part of the program, which I declined. I kind of wish I had done it, but if I had, then I'd be prohibited from talking about it. So it was probably a good choice. But all those files from Russia documented that they'd been studying it, and Colonel Sokolov made it very clear why they were doing it, to reverse engineer it. They wanted to figure out how UFOs could do what they could not do and give the Russians an advantage, specifically in stealth technology. The new Americans were ahead of them in that. They thought by studying UFOs, they could learn how to do what UFOs did. So it was a very practical program. They weren't doing it just to find out where are aliens real. They wanted to be able to build these things. That's what they worked on for 10 years. And then after that program ended, there was another one called Thread 3 that continued the research. And I'm pretty sure it continues to this day. I was told by Russian military folks they do have crash retrievals. I was promised at one point that I get to take a look at them. That never happened. And they, after Yeltsin fell and Putin and the hardliners came back in, I think that window of opportunity that was open for a brief time during Perestroika, Glasnost, closed. And I think it's probably closed forever now. But I was able to get a lot of information out. I went back in 96, and the whole tenor of the situation in Russia had changed. The hardliners had retaken control. The witnesses who had talked to me on camera in 93, not one of them would meet with me anymore.
Wow.
So it was clear that things had changed drastically.
So go back to 1993. You're in your hotel room. You've got this trove of documents, and you're about ready to head to the airport. What is going through the mind of George Knapp?
I'm wondering if I'm going to get stopped and sent to a gulag. But I noticed there was of the documents we had, the only designation that it was classified, and I didn't understand Russian, but the Russians helped me know what they were on the top pages of individual documents. So I just removed those top pages, threw the rest of the documents into my suitcase, and hoped for the best. I found a way to carry them on my person through. If you've ever been to Moscow, you go through a lot of checkpoints to get out of there. And each one of those checkpoints, it became a little more tense, thinking, is this it? But I got through it and brought it all home and shared it with the U.S. government. And a lot of them I've made public before, not all of them, but I do intend to do that at some point.
Man, I wish if you were my uncle, you would be like the cool uncle in the family, because that's like some serious like 007 type shit. I mean, that is pretty cool. I'm curious, talking about Russia, talking about how the U.S. has continued to cover this up, and of course they continue to lie to Congress about this. Why do you think that there is such a difference between how our government treats this topic and the others? Like it seems, for instance, that there's so much secrecy here, but like when you look at how, say, like South America treats this topic, they're much more open. Do you have any theories as to why there's such a big disparity in many ways?
I think the U.S. government, the U.S. military, the CIA control the vibe for all of our allies. Anybody who relies on us for their defense or buys weapons systems or interacts with our military, I think they take their marching orders on the UAP topic from us. The public files that have been made public in Brazil, there's not much in there that's been released that says there are crashes or recoveries. There's a great deal of hints, and I learned this very recently, of some really incredible video footage, film footage, photos, things that vanished from the Brazilian files that suggest that the Americans are what got it. I think countries like Canada and Australia and the UK take their cues from us about how this is handled. Other countries, around the world have released their files. I don't think we've got any smoking guns in any of that information. And if there were smoking guns, they probably wouldn't have released it at all. But there are other countries and cultures that seem a lot more open about this than us. I think it boils down to national security concerns. And, I don't know how they're ever going to get around this. We are in a race for that technology. The Russians want it. We want it. The Chinese want it. I think all three of those countries have crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs of their own. They're trying to figure it out. I don't think any of those countries have mastered this tech yet. But the first one to get it wins.
Yeah.
The capabilities of one Tic Tac, you control it. If we had that tech now, we certainly didn't have it in 2004 when it happened, and we certainly don't have it now, in my opinion. But the first country to get that tech, you control everything. You don't need to build any more F-22s or F-35s or B-21s. You've got a Tic Tac, you win. And so I don't know how you ever get around that in terms of them admitting what they know, admit where we are in this program, that we've been studying this and reverse engineering this technology and trying to figure it out. I just don't see them ever saying that, because you can't divorce the national security aspects from a revelation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk here in a bit about whistleblowers, and of course, we'll talk about what's happening with the congressional hearing, and then I want to wrap up with this Netflix series that you'll be coming out with. But before we move on to those things, I want to talk about some of the targeted retaliation that whistleblowers have received. Some somewhat minimal, some makes me sick to my stomach to think about. I'm curious, have you received, as long as you've been doing this, have you received any sort of retaliation or been the recipient of any surveillance, electronic surveillance, technical surveillance, anything like that? What have you experienced as a journalist?
Well, surveillance for sure. Some of the guys who used to follow me around in those early days of that Area 51 stuff, after they got out, after they left the service and or Wackenhut, told me about it, that they had been assigned to follow me. I know that my phones at KLAS were tapped. And, today we assume, I guess I do, that everything is on my phone is somebody's listening somewhere. And every email, it goes into a giant database somewhere, that nothing really is private, not Signal, not Proton, and any of those encrypted devices either, that everything you do electronically is being monitored and avail themselves. That's what we think of today. But in 1989, when I started this, I didn't think my phones were being tapped at a newsroom, a CBS affiliate in Las Vegas, but it was because I had make open pitches on the air. I know there are people in our listening audience who know about Area 51 and S4 and secrets in the desert. I want you to reach out to me. And many of them did. 6 times right in a row, people I talked to on the phone in my office in KLAS, the next day after me talking to them, they were visited by people who told them to shut the hell up, one after another. And they were given death threats and threats of imprisonment. Boom, boom, boom. And, at the time, I was appalled to think that there's no way in hell whoever was listening to my phone got a warrant for that. They just did it. And it seemed ridiculous to think that a little reporter in Las Vegas and a TV station would be worthy of that kind of surveillance, but it was true. It happened. I've never had the knock at the door that told me you better quit or else. I've had a lot of people make runs at me, offer me bad information to see if I'd screw up. That made it clear that they were watching what I was doing. I think Jeremy Corbell, my friend, has had some more recent and more frightening kind of intrusions in his life and threats that he's had to deal with. I can't imagine what it's like for these whistleblowers, Matt. You read X and UFO Twitter and other social media platforms, these UFO people and loudmouths whining and moaning, saying, I'm not going to pay attention to any of this anymore. I don't want to hear about any witnesses or documents or programs or Arrow. I don't want to hear any of that stuff. I want the bodies and the flying saucers. And until I get them, I'm going to sit in the corner and hold my breath. And I'm not going to eat lunch anymore. You show them to me right now because, gosh, I've been here on Twitter for 3, 4 months and nothing has come up. There's been no solid proof. Why won't you deliver it to my front door? Whiny little brats who don't realize the amount of progress that has been made over the past 5 or 6 years compared to the 50 years preceding it. It's been an amazing time. It's been an absolutely astonishing amount of progress. And for whistleblowers, the challenges of coming forward to say what they know. There is a group of them that have worked hands-on on these craft, in these reverse engineering programs. They have seen the stuff. They have talked to David Grusch. They have made themselves available and put themselves out on the line. And now people are demanding, we want you to come forward and talk to Congress. There's no way you can ever be prosecuted. The government wouldn't dare try to put you in prison. Give up your career and your job, put your lives at risk. Go ahead and spill your beans because I'm here on UFO Twitter and I want to know. And it's preposterous. It is outrageous. There are people who have made themselves available to Congress, but they know the risks. Look what happened to Grusch. He was really careful and operating very carefully in what he made public. You know, it was part of his job to find these people. He was assigned that by the UAP task force. He had the clearances to do the work. They had clearances to do the work. He found them, got that information, released what he could, and still got excoriated, ripped up by media critics, break-ins at his home, the release, the slime job that was done releasing, trying to destroy his credibility by releasing very personal and painful medical records. It's pretty disgusting. Now, you're a whistleblower who has worked on one of these programs, and I've talked to them. I've been in contact with them. I know what they're going through. Their clearances, they leave the military, they go to work for an intelligence agency or a defense contractor. They need a clearance to support their families. They're told, give up your job, put yourself at risk, because I, UFO person, demand to know what you know. And, you know, it's pretty scary for them. I know that there are some of them that want to come forward, but they risk everything if they do it. And if you don't think that whistleblowers are prosecuted, then you don't know the names Bill Binney or Thomas Drake or Gary McKinnon, that kid in the UK who broke into some NASA computers and says he saw evidence of this secret space program and information about UFOs. Did they go after him? U.S. Department of Justice spent 10 years trying to extradite that guy so they could send him to prison in the U.S. because he broke into those computers. Bill Binney and Thomas Drake, they had released information that the public had absolutely every right to know about these mass surveillance programs. What happened to them? They were imprisoned. They were prosecuted. The Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, retroactively classified information that they had made public. It wasn't classified when they released it. They retroactively made it public, made it classified, and sent those guys away. It destroyed their lives. You don't think they'd do the same to these whistleblowers? Of course they would.
Yeah, yeah. It's and the people that complain about it, they literally, especially these junk journalists that write these hit pieces. I think you were referring to the Ken Klippenstein piece. These folks, they have no idea how the real world works. They have no appreciation for not only the risk to their physical safety, but jeopardizing their retirement, jeopardizing going to jail, jeopardizing the livelihood or being able to put food on the table for their families. People just don't get it. And touching on the surveillance thing, you were talking about, the mass surveillance thing, a little bit of info for you. There exists a FISA exemption for protecting the legacy program. So with that, I am quite certain. I had someone reach out that said, just so you know, NSA is now watching your show. We know, we've been told a lot of members of Congress and their staffers watch the Good Trouble show, but the NSA is watching the show, and they are also watching the comments in the YouTube chat. So people think, oh, you need a FISA warrant to spy on Americans. There is an exemption for protecting the program. So I guarantee you, all of us are are being surveilled, and frankly, it just disgusts me as an American that these kinds of things and retaliation happen, not only to these folks that have firsthand knowledge of this, but to journalists such as yourself. And another form of retaliation I want to touch on. Recently on Coast to Coast, you had researcher Rob Heatherly, who spoke at length about this group called the Guerrilla Skeptics of Wikipedia, run by this lady by the name of Susan Gerbic or Gerbic. And essentially this organization it's a nonprofit out of Salinas, California. They have literally hundreds of Wikipedia editors that work for them that hijack Wikipedia pages that are anything that are related to what they deem as pseudoscience. So, of course, UAPs, UFOs, but it could even be like chiropractic care or homeopathy. You have been, as a journalist that is well-known, award-winning journalist in this field, you have been the target of these folks. What would you like to share about that? It really is maddening.
I didn't really pay attention to my Wikipedia page. Other people had told me what was going on. I remember seeing it the last time I really checked on it, which was years ago. There was something in there about a girlfriend that had somehow got edited in there. Some girlfriend I knew in high school or something. I'm wondering who the hell put that in there. That's pretty strange. But I didn't really pay much attention to it until others brought it to my attention how slanted the view of my work had been, how slimy the terminology that had been used. And I looked at it how could this be possible that hundreds of people would devote their lives to controlling so many pages of Wikipedia on this particular topic? What is wrong with your life if you're reduced to doing that and slanting it and determining how the rest of the world that uses Wikipedia will view this subject matter? There's something missing in somebody's life that would devote their time to doing something that they think is nonsense. We had Rob on the show. He's done some really great work in exposing these folks. They still control these pages, I guess. For people like Lou Elizondo, they get slimed on a regular basis there. People who try to make changes, just as simple as where Lou Elizondo was born, are rejected. The person who is the subject of the page tries to correct very blatant biographical errors and isn't allowed. They'll change it back. I didn't understand it. I feel sorry for those folks in a sense, but you and some others, Ali and Rob, have done a great job of exposing it, that at least on these subject matters, you have to take Wikipedia with a grain of salt, because these guerrilla skeptics control all the pages that deal with this topic.
It's insane. And Wikipedia, I think it's like the fourth most trafficked site in the world. So if you're wanting to learn about UAPs, and most people are going to go to Wikipedia, and they will go and they'll look up, who is this Lou Elizondo guy or this David Grusch guy, and the vandalism and the propaganda that they spit out by basically taking ownership of these pages. They all have seniority as Wikipedia editors, so they're able to kick out or ban editors of lesser seniority. They go and they change these pages where if you read it, you look at it and you go, wow, this David Grusch guy sounds like a conspiracy theorist. It's so slanted, and it is such blatant propaganda. And I was speaking to Rob Heatherly the other day. It's like way over. I think it's like close to 3,000 pages that the guerrilla skeptics are currently owning in essence, and well over 2 million edits that they have made. I mean, it is a propaganda operation I'll be in Washington next week for the hearing, and we have some meetings with some folks in Congress, and that will be something in particular I'm going to bring up because it's just insane.
Well, it's amazing how much time they have to devote to it. People have tried to make a simple edit here or there, and bam, within a matter of hours, somebody's on top of it and changing it back. That they have that much time to spend on distorting this stuff. The other part of it is how childish it is.
Yeah.
Matt, you've seen some of the the back and forth discussions they have. It's like some clique in high school that wants to slander the cheerleaders or something.
Yeah,
What is
exactly.
wrong with your life if you're going to spend that much time on doing something like that?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's I my hope is that there's going to be one giant class action lawsuit, either a racketeering lawsuit or something. But let's move on to the hearing. And before we actually jump into it, you spoke on Weaponized. I'm a big fan of your podcast with Jeremy Corbell. Actually, watching you guys is what inspired me to get into the game. But you spoke on Weaponized about the Schellenberger article, where it revealed this waived, unacknowledged special access program by the name of Immaculate Constellation. And you mentioned on the program on Weaponized that you have read the document. Can you elaborate on what you read and give us at least like one tidbit that folks at home don't know about that you think might be useful for members of Congress to know about?
I think that not everything in that document is completely accurate. I think it's a mixture of things that are real and not real. So I would caution folks to take it with a grain of salt. The people that I have spoken to who are really in a position to know were flabbergasted by some of these revelations. They think they should know about something like that if it existed, and I trust them to some degree. But so far, the guy who has made that information available has also, I think, possibly going to meet with people in Congress and is willing to go on the record. There are risks, I would say, to him and to other people in saying too much about it. I'm sorry I'm not being very much more helpful on it, but there's a lot of other information that comes with that document that could probably better make the case. I'm really not confident we're ever going to see somebody like that in front of Congress. There are risks. And in addition, although we know some people, in elected members and staff members who are working really hard to try to get to the bottom of this mystery, to share information with the public, to dig deeper into these programs, there are limits on what even members of Congress can do. Some of those limits come from within Congress itself, higher ups at these committees, people who call the shots. I applaud the people who've been pushing this ball down the field, even though some of them, I see it on UFO social media platforms. They hate them because they're not on their side of the political spectrum. We can't believe these guys because they're not our party.
Right.
Can't you just willing suspension of disbelief, suspend your political biases for a while if we all agree that trying to get to the bottom of the UFO mystery is a good thing, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican? I'll tell you, Matt, that hearing last year, we were sitting right in the front row, and on one side you have Representative Burchett and Luna and Mace and Gates, and on the other side you have Jamie Raskin and AOC, literally the left and the right, all of them asking good questions, all of them focused on what really matters in this issue. It was really kind of an inspirational moment that people on the opposite sides of the spectrum who fight about every single issue, who essentially hate each other's political beliefs, were united on this one issue. It's like it's the only bipartisan issue, a legitimate issue in Washington right now. And that's amazing. And so I try not to jump into those political discussions about who's right about Trump or who supports Harris and Biden. It's a distraction from the central focus. And I look forward to what happens in the next hearing. I think people are going to gripe and moan, which is what they always do. They won't be satisfied no matter who the witnesses are. But just having that hearing, having testimony, giving it media attention, they have to cover it for something this important. That's a step in the right direction.
It is. Will you be at the hearing?
I hope so. My TV station has not made a decision whether they're sending me yet or not. Jeremy Corbell wants me to go. I know he's going to be there, but I'd like to be there to cover it. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And regarding the Immaculate Constellation program, a hint that I would put out to folks that are interested in FOIA is the parent Immaculate word is used in other programs. It's not housed in DOD. You need to go look under the NSC, and I think you may find a few things. So it's worth digging into. That is for sure. And I'll be out there for the hearings. I certainly hope to meet you in person. But I want to talk a bit about you've got a new show coming up, a series on Netflix called Investigation Alien. Let's watch.
You are what we would classify as a whistleblower.
Yes, that would be exactly what I am.
I want to be able to share this with the world. How can we help you break this story? There is enormous amount of evidence to suggest that we do have a non-human intelligence interacting with us on this planet. We need to get beyond that obvious question, are UFOs real, to what really matters. Why are they here? And what do they want from us? We can handle it, can't we? My name is George Knapp. People know me as the UFO reporter. Last year, the Pentagon debuted Arrow to investigate UFOs.
Arrow has found no evidence.
If they would go to such lengths to discredit this topic, it tells us we're going to have to do it ourselves. We need solid evidence, and we need it now. We've had some pretty dramatic UFO encounters all over the world.
Como se eu tivesse me queimado.
Wow. Something weird happened to those bulls.
What happened in Phoenix was seen by thousands of people.
Federal agents were confiscating videos afterwards.
He said, as far as you're concerned, Lieutenant, it never happened. We are not alone.
The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had. Vimos una luz alrededor de la lancha. There will be some information that's going to be put out that will shock the world.
The more we can bring out of the shadows, the closer we get to answers.
That looks amazing. Wow, I cannot wait. That comes out this Friday, correct?
Right. So November 8th, I guess, somewhere after midnight this Thursday night, it's going to drop. It's 6 hours, 6 episodes, 6 hours. A lot of travel went into this. I went, I don't know how many states we went in, but it was all over the country. East Coast, West Coast. We went to Mexico, had a couple of different trips down there, and Brazil to investigate some cases that are known and some cases that are not known, talked to incredible witnesses, gathered a lot of evidence, did some physical testing, got some video of some things that I've heard about before but never actually seen. I think people are going to enjoy it. I hope so. We worked hard on this. It was 14 months of travel to some very rough locations, not travel for the timid. Planes, trains, automobiles. I mean, no trains, but it was a lot of work. Big crew. Netflix really put a lot of money and resources into this, and they're hopeful that it does well. I think it will. I'm proud of the work we did.
I cannot wait. It looks amazing. Every once in a while, I go onto Netflix or whatever, Amazon Prime, looking for some new UAP thing. And when I found out about this and that you were the key guy, I was just absolutely thrilled. So best of luck on that. I know it is going to be just fantastic. So if you have some time, we have quite a few questions from our listeners, and would love to run those by you.
Okay, we'll give it another 15 minutes. Is that good?
Okay, great. And folks, thanks again for tuning in. If you enjoy the show, we always appreciate hitting these thumbs up and subscribe button. Really, really appreciate that. Firstly, Science Bob, thank you very much for the super chat. So happy to see you have George on. Keep it up. Thank you very much. We love Science Bob McGuire.
Yeah.
From
He's a good
Jed, do you think Harris would be a disclosure president? Or Trump?
No. The answer is no to both of them.
Yeah.
Trump's knowledge about this is sort of like his knowledge about a lot of other subjects about this deep. He's mentioned it a couple of times, got a lot of coverage for his comments, doesn't really say very much, doesn't seem to believe the witnesses that he says he's talked to. I don't think he'd be the disclosure president. I don't think either one of them would be, because it's not going to be allowed. I just don't. If you were the disclosure president, and you said something, you'll never get anything else done in your whole administration. I mean, it would dominate the rest of the media coverage. People would be asking questions that I think our government is not prepared to answer.
I agree with that. JW, what are your thoughts on the consciousness aspect of the phenomena Is the phenomenon materialistic, spiritual, a blending of the two?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know the answer to that. And more importantly, I don't know anyone who does. I've been pretty far up the food chain with people who've done these investigations on behalf of discrete agencies and programs, and they've gathered a great deal of information. Even if we have craft, I think we do. Even if we have bodies, and I think we do, that doesn't necessarily answer where they're from. I think there have been attempts to analyze materials to look for some kind of unobtainium. These things have been here forever. They don't need to use materials from some faraway solar system. They've been here. They would use materials that we've seen, but I suspect they engineer them in ways that humans have not been able to accomplish so far. Certainly, we can't control gravity as we've seen these craft do. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know that anybody knows the answer. I suspect it is something much more complicated and more wondrous than we've been able to figure out.
This from Wasabi asks George if he knows anything about the Monroe Institute or the Gateway Process document. Ask him if consciousness should be the main focus of the phenomenon.
I know that Robert Bigelow believes that it should, and that Colin Kelleher, my friend and co-author, believes that it should, that UFO mystery is sort of a subset of a much bigger and more complicated mystery, and that's consciousness. The idea that consciousness existed before the physical universe did, I've come to sort of accept that as being possible, and that's a hard one to get your head around. I know that Bigelow, the BICS, the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, has encouraged and supported financially consciousness researchers around the world, and they're trying to figure out how all these things fit together. They believe that consciousness is the ultimate mystery, that it created the physical universe, that it came first, and that it's directly related to our perception of these UFOs and aliens, whatever they are.
Let's see, El Pupo Gandalf. Ask George this question if you have time. Do you know anything about the Transnational Technology Mission Center, known as TTMC or T2MC, which is apparently the new name or whatever, as I understand it, for the Office of Global Access? Have you heard anything about this?
No, I don't know about that one.
Okay.
You know what it's like, Matt. It's hard to keep your fingers on all the stuff that happens.
Yeah.
It used to be when I started out, there'd be one UFO story in some media outlet a month, maybe. It was pretty easy to keep up with all that goes on. Now I can't keep up with it. It's like the alien Nazca mummy bodies. That's another one. I don't have a way into that story. My plate is full as it is, so it's not something I paid attention to. I just figure somebody else is going to work on that and let me know whether it's real or not.
Yeah, no, understood. Has George been investigating any new stories he finds legitimate?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, understood. Question, what is your hope to see for the rest of 2024? You guys rock.
I hope there's a way to get some of these whistleblowers' information public without putting them at risk. I hope that the congressional hearing, if you have good, solid witnesses who engage the public, who keep Congress's interest level high and make a lot of media coverage. I hope this goes well for them because it would encourage future hearings. I hope this Netflix series does well. I mean, it's global reach. That was what appealed to me. Netflix had come to me and asked me to do it, and that was the selling point why I agreed to go along with it and work with them, because it's a global audience. The series was translated into 124 languages, which is pretty astonishing when you think about that. I hope that people will pay attention to it and that we're able to expand the audience of people around the planet who are interested in this mystery. There's a lot of cool things happening. There's some people like Jay Stratton is working on a book that'll follow the Lou Elizondo book. I think Dr. Jim Lukatsky has some plans for future writings that will know more about the inner workings of these programs. That's all progress in my view, even if we don't get the ultimate truth that looking at bodies and craft anytime soon.
Mark McConnell asks, about what % of your UAP info have you shared publicly?
Be hard to figure out. I've got a lot of stuff that we haven't made public yet, just because I haven't finished vetting it. because we haven't got a proper platform or venue to release it. There's some pretty good stuff that's still sitting in the wings that I hope will come out in the next year or so. But there's some steps we need to take before that can happen.
Let's see, Arcos Sapiens Stellaris. George, what are your thoughts on Lou Elizondo's words that time is a luxury we don't have? Thanks in advance.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I know that Lewis said that, and there are a couple other people who've said that there's some impending incident or something looming in our future. I don't have solid information on that. I've heard those kinds of predictions before. I hope they're not right. I know people write to me all the time, what's coming? Should we prepare for doom in 2026 or 2027? I would say those predictions are about as likely as the predictions that happen every year, that this is the year for disclosure. Those predictions haven't come true so far, and I'm not convinced that they're going to come true this time. So I'm not wasting any time worrying about it because there's nothing I can do about it anyway.
Yeah, for sure. 265 Petstar, please be careful, George, and thank you for all of your hard work over the years. I know everyone is very, very grateful for everything that you've done and wishes you to stay safe.
I'm safe and I'm having a blast. So
awesome.
I don't know how much longer it goes on. I mean, I'm not a youngster anymore. But I'd like to continue for a while. I tried retiring about 4 years ago. It just didn't work out. So here I am.
Yeah, there you go. Let's see. What has been more frightening in your career, investigating the mob or the government cover-up of NHI? That's from Heiser Soze.
Oh, that's a great name. The government cover-up stuff is way more frightening.
Yeah.
Because, that threat and that skullduggery affects all of us.
Yes.
The mob was a very small universe back in the day in Las Vegas, and it's largely gone. At least the Italian mafia is gone from Las Vegas, at least the casinos. But this government cover-up has been underway for more than 75 years. It's destroyed a lot of lives. It's spied on people. I mean, they've infiltrated UFO organizations and spied on UFO researchers. They've bugged phones. They've followed people. They've made threats to witnesses. They tried to cover it up. There's untold millions of dollars of legitimate national security funds that have been funneled into illegal programs. It's a threat to our way of life. It's a threat to democracy. It's intimidating. It can't continue, but I don't see an end to it anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. Final question. So, and this is actually question is for me. So the elephant in the room is, who are the designers of UAPs? Why do you think that we're dancing around this question? Where do UAPs originate, and why is it the only way to, why is it that we're not talking about who is building these things, who is flying them around?
I agree with you. That's the central question. Who are they? Why are they here? What's their interest in us? That's sort of what I tried to do in that Netflix series, as opposed to focusing all of our energies, which is what the UFO public mostly does, on secret government cover-ups. Where's the stashed saucers? Where are they keeping the bodies? Now, of course, we're going to be curious about that stuff. But the other questions, which are tougher to answer, are the ones that count. Who are they? How long have they been here? Are they interested in us or more interested in the planet? And, there have been communications over the decades, people who are in communication with these beings wherever they're from. I don't think they are telling us the truth, because there's a lot of different answers that they give. Are they ET? It's possible. Are they interdimensional? Entirely possible. Are they some kind of amalgam of spiritual consciousness, tulpas, something like that? Also possible. The best answer I can give is there's more than one answer. I think we may be the cosmic drive-in movie theater where non-human intelligences come here to check out these weird humans because we're so incredibly entertaining and unpredictable. Moments of great cruelty and moments of great beauty and kindness. We're a fascinating species, and I think we've attracted attention from a lot of different realms. And maybe the answer is something that's beyond us. Maybe the ultimate answer at the UFOs is like trying to get an answer to, is God real? It's something that just is always going to be just a little bit tantalizingly out of our reach. But the pursuit is worth it. Even if we don't get these answers, the pursuit itself, we've learned so much about the universe and about ourselves that, if I die not knowing the answers to it, I'll be okay with that. because the pursuit has been worth it.
Absolutely. Well, George, thank you very much for joining us again. Your upcoming series on Netflix, Investigation Alien. I think, what did you say, November 8th?
November 8th, so Friday it drops. I hope everyone enjoys it. Hope I get to come back, Matt, after it's out and maybe talk to you about some of the content.
I would love that. You have an open invitation on the Good Trouble Show anytime, sir. Thank you very much for joining us, George. I hope to see you in D.C. And thank you for everything that you've done, your advocacy and journalism on this topic. We really appreciate it.
And you, Matt, you're doing great work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. All right, George Knapp, ladies and gentlemen. All right, well, that was, I'm speechless. It's, I've worked in entertainment in Hollywood for quite some time, really since 1998, and it's very rare that I'm ever starstruck by anyone. And George Knapp, I mean, you want to talk about a living legend? Yeah. And as I always say, this whole topic, it is a team effort. And of course, we are lucky to have had people, journalists like George Knapp and others who have laid this foundation that we all have stood upon. And we would not be there. We would not be where we would be in this process if it were not for the work of people like George Knapp. I want to speak just sort of briefly on a couple of things. Going back to this whole Wikipedia thing, it's frustrating when you have people such as George Knapp, journalists such as George Knapp, journalists such as Ross Coulthart, scientists, Gary Nolan, whistleblowers such as David Grusch and Lou Elizondo. It's frustrating, and it's absolutely wrong that you have an organization such as the guerrilla skeptics of Wikipedia, who have figured out how to game the system, figured out how to weaponize Wikipedia, because it's a weaponization of what is essentially an open source system. This group, they have figured out how to operate by the letter of Wikipedia law, but they have figured out how to skirt around the intent of it. So they've taken these pages, they have essentially taken them over, and the way that works is Wikipedia editors and editing. It's all based on a seniority system. So if I've been editing Wikipedia pages as a Wikipedia editor for, let's say, 10 years, and I've written a few pages, I keep an eye on that page, and by that, what you can do as a Wikipedia editor, you can watch pages, and you will receive an email if that page changes. So you take control of the page, and a good example of this would be Lou Elizondo. So the founder of the Guerrilla Skeptics, a lady by the name of Susan Gerbic, actually wrote Lou Elizondo's page, and she did it so that she maintains control of it. So what happens is they take a Wikipedia page, they either write it from scratch, such as Lou Elizondo's or David Grusch's, and they write the page in such a way that a reader that is coming across this for the first time, they read it, and these Wikipedia editors, these guerrilla skeptics, they write it in such a way that it propagates the debunking point of view. Like if you go, for instance, the guerrilla skeptics, they maintain and they wrote the page for Mick West, debunker Mick West. They maintained the page for Neil deGrasse Tyson. If you go onto Wikipedia and you look at those pages of these debunkers, it is picture perfect. It is so well written, so professional. And the reason they do that is they know that if you are a segment producer for CNN, ABC, Fox News, whatever, and you want to learn about Mick West, or you want to learn about David Grusch, or you want to learn about Lou Elizondo, 9 times out of 10, that's what these journalists, what these segment producers for these journalists will go, they know that they will go to Wikipedia and look these things up. And what do they see? They'll go and they'll look at Mick West and they're like, oh my God, this guy is some insanely smart scientist who knows what he's talking about. We should book Mick West to come talk to us about what is going on with UAPs. They'll go and they'll look at David Grusch's page and they'll look at what these guerrilla skeptics have wrote, not knowing that they are looking at a piece of biased media. And they'll look at it and they'll go, my God, this David Grusch guy sounds like a nut. They'll go and they'll look at Lou Elizondo's page, which casts all sorts of doubt about his credentials. Colonel John Alexander, who I had the fortune of having dinner with him in Las Vegas over the summer, they removed Colonel John Alexander's Vietnam service. You've got to be kidding me. This is what these folks do. These are what these propagandists do. These professional debunkers that seemingly make a living at this stuff. George was talking about like the sheer volume of time that they put into this. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody spend 40 hours a week writing Wikipedia, writing articles for Wikipedia, editing Wikipedia? And why would these folks go on to UFO Twitter and constantly debunk this topic? It's like a 9-to-5 job. And I don't know about you, but if I were doing that, I would want to get paid for it. And I'm telling you, there is something to that. So this is what recently happened to me on Wikipedia. And this is also what happened to other folks on Wikipedia. So as many of you may or may not know, I'm also the director of strategy for the UAP Disclosure Fund. UAP Disclosure Fund, we are fortunate to have on our board of directors Colonel Carl Nell, Dr. Gary Nolan, Lou Elizondo, Yuan Feng. We have Christopher Mellon on our board of advisors. We have former Senate staffer Kirk McConnell on our board of advisors, and we have many more people that are part of our organization. We are going to be very involved in next week's hearing. We will all be there as part of the UAP Disclosure Fund. We are new on the scene, and we are doing a lot behind the scenes. We tend not to toot our horn. So a Wikipedia editor just day before yesterday went and took my Wikipedia page. There's a Wikipedia page about my professional design career in television. This Wikipedia editor went and expanded my Wikipedia page to talk about some of the shows I've done professionally as a designer. And they also added in there the Good Trouble Show. They added in there that I'm also the director of strategy for the nonpartisan, nonprofit 501c4 UAP Disclosure Fund. They added some other stuff about my political activism and my work when I had a political action committee. And what did they do? Actually, no, backing up. In addition, this Wikipedia editor went on to Dr. Gary Nolan's Wikipedia page and went on to Christopher Mellon's Wikipedia page and simply added a reference that Dr. Gary Nolan is on the board of directors for UAP Disclosure Fund. Added that same reference that Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, is on the board of advisors for UAP Disclosure Fund. And guess what happened? Overnight, this Wikipedia editor, who it seems to indicate is part of Susan Gerbich's Guerrilla Skeptics, stripped it all out, removed those edits. took my Wikipedia page and reverted it back to its simple form, talking about the Emmy awards that I've won and a couple of my shows. This, ladies and gentlemen, and members of Congress, we know that there are a lot of members of Congress and Senate and House staffers that watch our show. This behavior is an attack on free speech, full stop. It is unacceptable. It flies in the face of democracy. It is wrong. When you have an organization, a non-profit, that is able to hijack over 2,000 Wikipedia pages, rewrite them, ban other Wikipedia editors when they come in to try and correct the record, to set the record straight. When you have this cabal, this cult of Wikipedia editors, highly organized. They are part of a nonprofit called About Time Project out of Salinas, California. If you look it up under the IRS nonprofit website, you will find Susan Gerbic, who is on Twitter, who is on all the other social media outfits. You will find that this organization, they've been at this for a long time. They are dare I say, a highly organized intelligence operation, probably funded by a CIA cutout. They are so well organized, they have hijacked Wikipedia. So if you are someone that is completely new to any topic that they consider pseudoscience, again, it could be chiropractic, it could be homeopathy, it could be massage, it could be UAPs, Loch Ness Monster, whatever. It's literally over 2,000 subjects that they consider junk science. They go and they take it over. They go and they put in comments from Mick West as an authority. And we know that Mick West is nothing but a fraud and a charlatan. That's what these folks are. So folks in Congress watching this, I highly recommend, doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, Democrat or Republican, this kind of behavior is an attack on freedom of speech. It is an attack, outright attack on American and, well, just any journalist overseas. As I mentioned, they've gone after Ross Coulthard. They have gone after George Knapp. It is an abomination of democracy when you have Susan Gerbic and her whole clan, this fanatic cult supported by people like Mick West, this fanatic cult, propagandist cult hijacking the fourth most trafficked website on the internet. It's unacceptable and it cannot stand. There were on my little Wikipedia page that's been around for quite some time, there were over 32, something like 32 or 33 Wikipedia editors that were watching my page. You know why? They were waiting for some Wikipedia editor to come along and expand my Wikipedia page to talk about my UAP activism, my political activism, my work on UAP Disclosure Fund. They were ready to pounce. And that's exactly what they did. And people like Mick West and others, they condone this behavior. Mick West and others, they condone this cyberbullying. This is what people that are nothing but frauds do. This is what people that are zealots and fanatics, this is what they do. They want to control what you at home read. They want to control what you at home think. It is wrong on so many levels. And this is not a partisan issue. Every Republican and Democrat should be damn concerned that this is going on. It's out of control. And Wikipedia, the Wikimedia Foundation, they know about this. Whoever the guy is, I'm blanking on his name, he essentially has condoned it. The country of India recently filed through their justice system I believe it's a class action lawsuit against Jimmy Wales and the Wikimedia Foundation. That gives you some idea that people are waking up to this. I guarantee you, you can take this to the bank. There will be a class action suit against Wikipedia and the guerrilla skeptics. Susan Gerbic, you best get your house in order. You best get your affairs in order, because this is coming. And people like Mick West, who condone this, who I think are probably very heavily involved in the guerrilla skeptics, you should think twice about what you're doing. Because frankly, I don't even know how you look at yourself in the mirror when you condone that kind of activity, when you condone that level of cyberbullying, which they are famous for. I want to touch again on the whistleblower aspect of it that George spoke about. We're in a difficult position because it is, in my view, it is going to take whistleblowers, and there are a lot of them that have firsthand knowledge of this cancer that is on our democracy, this cancer where you have a Pentagon, an intelligence community, and the military industrial complex essentially running rogue, that are doing things that are un-American, that fly in the face of what it means to be a democracy, that flies in the face of what it means to be an American, no matter what your party affiliation, no matter who you vote for president. It is a slap in the face to all of you at home because they think you work for them. They think all of you watching this program work for the Pentagon. They think you work for the CIA. They think you work for the NSA. I encourage all of you to, when you're done watching this program and hopefully telling your friends about our show, I want you to do a little home project. I want you to go onto YouTube and I want you to search for an interview with comedian Jon Stewart and Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathy Hicks. She's the number 2 person in the Pentagon, right below the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Jon Stewart interviewed her. I don't remember the name of the function, but he interviewed her live on stage in front of some kind of audience where Jon Stewart, who is a personal hero to me, he interviewed Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks and grilled her on the fact that the Pentagon literally cannot account for 40% of its physical assets. 40%. He grilled her on the fact that the Pentagon does not know where billions, if not trillions, of dollars are missing. Money that you and I, as taxpayers, you and I who work hard to put food on our family's table, goes to this Pentagon black hole. I want you to watch this interview and I want you to listen to the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks. I want you to listen to how she responds to Jon Stewart's questions. You will be appalled. It lays bare the arrogance that these Pentagon officials, almost all of who have worked for some defense contractor, it lays bare the sheer arrogance that they have. You want to talk about a chip on this shoulder's lady? This chip on her, this lady's shoulder? Listen to this interview. It is eye-opening. All of these folks that work in the Pentagon in leadership positions, especially Secretary of Defense, it is a revolving door. They will go from Lockheed Martin right into the SecDef position. And then they'll go right into they'll exit that and they'll go right into some cushy job. We saw with former director of Aero, Sean Kirkpatrick, who, as the director of Aero, sent considerable sums of money to the Department of Energy. I think it's the Battelle Memorial Institute, which is the civilian organization that runs I'm blanking on it. One of the nuclear weapons complexes. He leaves Aero, and guess where he goes? He gets a nice cushy job from the agency that in his previous position, he was giving a lot of money to. There's a thing called an emoluments clause that is supposed to prevent that kind of stuff from happening. But this is the level of corruption that we are talking about. Members of Congress, during this hearing next week, and I'll meet a lot of you in person, and I'm looking forward to it. These are the things that I encourage all of you in Congress, regardless of party, to start asking questions. All of you in Congress, you have a constitutionally mandated duty for oversight of the executive branch. And guess what? The executive branch, for decades, on both sides of the aisle, have been essentially giving you guys the middle finger and saying, we don't want you to know what we're up to. We don't want all of you in Congress to know about these waived, unacknowledged special access programs related to UAPs. You guys do not get to know about that. How have they done this? How have they hidden this from all of you in Congress? They stuffed it in these waived special access programs. Where have they stuffed it? They've stuffed it under the National Security Council, the NSC. They've stuffed it in the Department of Energy under the 1954 Atomic Energy Act. They have stuffed it in the DOE as transclassified nuclear information. Why have they done that? Because they know that a president cannot declassify anything that is transclassified nuclear information. Now, the president can, under executive order, declassify stuff that was classified under the NSC. They can do that. But when it comes to talking about crashed UAPs or reverse engineering of crashed UAPs under those special access programs, the president cannot unilaterally do that. That is a misconception. Donald Trump, Biden, or whoever, they do not have the power to declassify that information unilaterally. They are part of the process, but it goes through a committee. It is a mechanism to make sure a president doesn't sell, say, like nuclear weapons designs to Russia. That is the backstop. But what it has turned into is a misuse of those classification authorities. Members of Congress, this is a misuse of that classification authority within the executive branch and the Department of Energy. The other thing I recommend all of you in Congress do, I don't think it's going to happen in this hearing, but I recommend that there needs to be really what needs to happen is a Senate hearing next year. A Senate hearing, a special hearing with subpoena power where you subpoena Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathy Hicks, who has the power to and does waive special access programs. She has the ability, folks in Congress, if you don't know about this, the United States Air Force can come to her and say, we have a special access program. It's a support program for whatever. We want it waived, and we want it unacknowledged. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathy Hicks, with a stroke of a pen, can decide it's waived and decide it's unacknowledged. And guess what she has to tell the members of the Intel and Armed Services Committee? All she has to do is all she's required legally to do is say, I have this special access program called Immaculate Constellation. It's a support program for the Air Force. It costs $2 billion a year, and that's it. That's it. That's all they have to tell you in Congress. The Gang of Eight, they don't have to tell you about any of this. These are the guardrails that the Pentagon and the CIA is one of the primary stakeholders. Actually, the two primary stakeholders of this whole topic are the NSA, the CIA. This is what they have done. This is the trickery that they are using to hide this from all of you in Congress, because they don't want you to know about it. They do not want you asking questions. This is why they trot out former Director of Aero, Sean Kirkpatrick, to throw cold water on things, to poison the well. These are the games they play. Now, most importantly, for those of you in Congress that are watching this show, and I hope those of you that are will share this show with your fellow lawmakers, who else you should be subpoenaing, or whatever the correct word is, are the C-suite executives for these defense contractors. You need to subpoena the entire C-suite, because it is entirely possible the CEO of Lockheed Martin or Boeing is insulated from these things. I don't think they are, but the only way you're going to compel testimony, truthful testimony, is to put these folks under the threat of perjury. Because you do not have a democracy when you have defense contractors threatening people. You do not have a democracy when the security contractors working for these defense contractors are threatening whistleblowers. That is not a democracy. That is a military junta. When you have the Pentagon operating hand in hand, linked finger to finger with these defense contractors, this revolving door of abject corruption lining their pockets like fat cats. That, my friends, in Washington, that is the real corruption, and that is the cancer upon our democracy. None of us want to jeopardize the national security of the United States of America. Not one whistleblower, not one talk show host like me. None of us do. But what we want is for the American people and the world to be told the truth about our place in the universe. There is no need to reveal how many goodies we have stashed in the garage that were reverse engineered from our friends from out of town. We do not want to do anything that would endanger this company or this country and reveal to our foreign adversaries our military capabilities. That is not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is restoring the constitutionally mandated oversight of the legislative branch over the executive branch. What we are talking about is ending this corruption and illegal activity by these defense contractors. For those of you that have not read the article that myself, Christopher Sharp, and Josh Boswell wrote for the Daily Mail, this article came out almost a year ago, I think towards the end of November, where we lay out in detail, all of you in Congress, please look at this. We laid out in detail exactly how the CIA has been running the crash recovery program under the Directorate of Science and Technology, under a very classified program called the Office of Global Access. When we aired that when we put that article out, it caused a firestorm in the CIA. They went into full panic mode because we outed that program. Because that program has been doing very illegal things. All of you in Congress, I encourage you to put people under oath and ask them about this. I encourage you in Congress to put under oath whoever is currently running Joint Special Operations Command. I encourage all of you in Congress to put under oath whoever is the current director of the Office of Global Access. I understand it's been renamed. Put these folks under oath and ask them, have they ever engaged in any kinetic retaliation against any American? Ask the NSA about an exemption, a FISA exemption to spy on Americans in order to protect the Deep Legacy program. All of you in Congress, I encourage you to put these people on the stand, but you have to put them under oath, because if you don't, they will lie to you. It is their job. And they may even lie to you then. Part of the security, part of the read-in to many of these waived, unacknowledged special access programs is they tell you, if you go and you testify, you are to lie about it. I don't know how the hell that happens. I don't know how people don't end up in jail. But these are the sorts of things, folks in Congress, I encourage you to look into. It is the Constitution of the United States gives you that power. The executive branch does not tell you what to do. Period. That is not what our founding fathers intended. Another thing I want to talk about for those of you in Congress that are watching this show are these quote unquote drone incursions. This has been coming out more and more in the news, in the mainstream media. Most of you in Congress have probably heard about these drone incursions over Langley Air Force Base that occurred during the month of December, where they had to move an entire wing of F-22 fighters to another base. This base, by the way, is one of the most important bases for protecting the airspace above our Capitol. This is when there is a airspace incursion that NORAD detects. They scramble fighters out of Langley Air Force Base, and the fact that you had hundreds of these drones, and to all of you in Congress, I'm telling you right now, the Pentagon is lying to you. Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, the chief, I'm blanking on his name, the spokesman for the Pentagon. They are not being truthful about what these drones really are. They are not from China. They are not from Russia. Over the past 2 weeks, I have interviewed 3 former law enforcement officials whose state had over 200 or more drone incursions over small towns. Fleets of drones that were upwards around 40 or 50 that were hovering around small towns in the United States, where law enforcement officials were receiving hundreds of 911 calls. And guess what? None of these drones made a sound. Absolutely none. I've interviewed these law enforcement officials. One was a chief of police. 1 or 2 of them were deputies. The stories that they shared with me, which I will make public sometime soon, I'm actually going to try and get this into some of you in Congress, because I think these individuals would be good witnesses for next week's hearing. These law enforcement officials flat out know that these were not prosaic drones. And they are concerned because they consider it a threat to the American public. These law enforcement officials are concerned because all of you in the Pentagon that are watching this show, we know that there are some of you that are trying to sweep it under the rug. They know this. Members of Congress, this whole drone thing is something that you should dig into, because there's more to the story that the Pentagon, that the CIA is not telling you. And it is not good news. It is a threat to the national security of the United States. And your executive branch is doing its damnedest to sweep it under the rug. And that is wrong. We send all of you in Washington, no matter Republican or Democrat, we send all of you into Washington to legislate on behalf of all of us. And you cannot be expected to do your job when the executive branch is lying to your face. You can't. So I encourage all of you on Capitol Hill to ask questions. Don't settle for the excuses that the executive branch is going to give you. I'm not convinced if the White House changes parties that it'll be any different. I hope it will, but it's got to happen, because this is a cancer on our nation that will continue to metastasize. And all of you in Congress, you are the ones that have the power to make it stop. So please do. I want to thank everyone for watching the show. In particular, I want to thank our chat moderators who have kept the chat clean. I also want to thank our new segment producer, Ali Travis, who has come on board to take some of the logistical headache off of my plate and has really helped take this show to a new level in terms of how it operates. I want to thank everyone that has made super chat donations, and I also want to thank all of our Patreon and YouTube financial supporters. Your donations are what allow me to do this show and bring you what I think are really important guests on a subject that is vital to the national security of the United States. We have a interview that will be coming up with Robert Hastings, who is the author of UFO and Nukes. He has documented extensively the very long history of UAPs tampering with our strategic nuclear weapons, another topic that Congress should be digging into, because there is a considerable amount that the Pentagon and in particular the United States Air Force is lying to you about regarding UAPs that have been tampering with our nuclear deterrent. I cannot think of a single thing that is a threat to our national security than that. Next week, I will be in Washington for the hearings, not on behalf of the Good Trouble Show, but on behalf of the UAP Disclosure Fund. We will have some news coming from there. And so everyone stay safe. Please go vote if you haven't already, and we will see you soon on the Good Trouble Show.